this session is called Mapping the Future. And by the way, my name is Marie Gaarder. I am the Director of the Evaluation Office and Global Director for Innovation and Country Engagement at 3IE. The objective of this session is to challenge you all to actively interpret the information and views that you have heard in these very engaging panels in the morning, and also to challenge you to actively interpret the evaluative evidence that is coming out of IEG and 3IE, and to think about how it can be applied in the real world to implementation, policy, and research. So we were in 3IE, I mentioned I'm also in charge of innovation, and we were thinking of sort of developing these little green pills, you know, that you could just pop and you would have the most recent knowledge of the evidence sort of right there. We didn't get the FDA approval, unfortunately, and maybe fortunately for you. So we'll sort of go old school instead, and we'll have 4 types of lightning talks. They'll all be a little bit different, but they all will be very short. And each of these talks is going to introduce you very briefly to a different body of evidence from IEG and from 3IE. And it was mentioned earlier today that you know, the problem is, of course, when we do this, you know, communicate quickly and to a wider audience, there's not room for nuance, and that will be the case here as well. So we will invite you to read these reports. They will, some of them are already online, available online. Others are sort of very soon hot off the press. But here we sort of engage you in just trying to absorb what you hear in terms of overall insights, and then directly sort of take those insights and be invited to engage around what that means. So with no further delay, over to our lightning talkers. First, Elena Bardasi, who is a senior economist at IEG. Then I will go straight over to Francis Rathinam, who is the senior evaluation specialist at 3IE. That will be followed by a third lightning sort of presentation, which will be a video from 3IE, and then finally, fourthly, I will present to you just some key takeaways from a very, very fresh, hot off the press, systematic review on citizen engagement done by 3IE. With all that sort of, with that green pill in mind, you know, and hopefully you'll all retain this, you'll be invited to break out.
Thank you. Actually, I need to acknowledge Marie was the first manager of the report on citizen engagement that we did at the the Independent Evaluation Unit. So thank you, Marie. It's very hard to present in 5 minutes in a lightning talk a report that took so long. So in order to do this, I would like to take you to ideal place. That's a place where development means better quality of life for its citizens. In this place, all those who normally are called to find the development solutions, the government, the development institutions, do something very remarkable. They go to the citizens and they ask, what are your priorities? Where should we put the money? How can we create better services, education, health, road? And they are also concerned about understanding which grievances the citizens have and how they can make these things work better for them. And perhaps they even ask the citizens to be partners in designing and implementing development projects and in monitoring their results. In this place, there is trust between the citizens, the government, development partners, and everybody committed to engage regularly to achieve the best possible development results. So, isn't this great? I believe that all of us probably think that this is how development should look like. And actually the bank says that this is how we should envisage development to be in order to achieve a better development results. And for this reason, in 2014, the bank made a commitment and said that 100% of all our investment project needs to include citizen engagement activities. But does an ideal place exist? And if it doesn't exist, can we learn something on what it takes to make it happen? So to answer this question, IG looked at many projects, visited several countries, and a few things stood out. First, it is not enough to make a commitment to create a citizen engagement. The first step is for the bank staff and management to embrace it. And on this front, we found that, yes, there has been progress. The bank staff is more and more committed and believes that citizen engagement is important. And actually, we also saw that an increasing number of projects integrate citizen engagement activities in their design. Second, although there is this increased number of projects with citizen engagement activities, we found that citizens are not yet regular partners. What this means is that, yes, the bank might go to a consultation, to a survey, and then perhaps they don't hear back from the bank again, and they don't know how the instances that they brought to the table were addressed, how their complaints were fixed. So treating citizens as regular partners means opening several channels of communications in both directions so that one can create a long-term relationships where behaviors change, things change in operations, where accountability increases structurally. Third, in order for citizen engagement to be successful, one needs to know with whom we engage. We need to know the citizens. So what we found is that the bank, half of the projects in the bank still treats citizens as a uniform, homogeneous group, when we know this is not the case. So which begs the question, whose voices were heard? Were the women, youth, disabled, the indigenous population listened to? How do we know that development works for them and not just for the elite? Finally, in order to understand how far from ideal place we are, we need to measure the results that have been achieved in order to learn from project experiences. So a level of monitoring that only tells us what was done to meet a commitment is not enough. The bank needs to ask a big fundamental question. What was this engagement for? With whom? Especially which results were achieved? So we know that there are several ingredients. We know which one they are. Actually, the strategic framework for citizen engagement of the bank identifies all these elements very nicely. We know that it has to be a long-term engagement with many channels of communication. It needs to be inclusive. And we also know that it's not only up to the bank, also the government needs to do their part. So it's not possible to do this everywhere, but it is possible that actually we saw examples where this works well. We saw the CCT in Dominican Republic, for example, where there are very established processes that connect the citizens and the service providers in a feedback loop that creates a space where the citizens feel safe to voice their concerns and the service providers feel compelled to come and fix the issues that go wrong. This is hard because it requires time, it requires resources, it requires long-term commitment. So the evaluation recognizes that this is not possible everywhere. However, if it is not possible to transform every place in ideal place, only when and where this happens, development can be transformational. Thank you.
Good afternoon. Most of you might have seen an evidence gap map. So this map is a tool developed by 3IE staff. It's a kind of a systematic compilation of all the rigorous impact evaluations and systematic reviews in a sector or subsector or a theme of research area. So the map looks something like this. I'll show a live one in a minute, but so all the key interventions in the theme or subsector is in the y-axis, and all the key outcomes in the x-axis. So the power of this tool is it's a simplicity. So we could straight away see the gaps here, that which are the interventions where there is very few studies, which are the outcomes there are not many studies, and also this shows the areas where there are actually a good number of studies where systematic reviews could be done, and so on. So this is a really useful tool for both the policymakers who look for evidence to inform their programs and policies, and also for the researchers and donors who can identify where we need more primary impact evaluations, and also the areas where we could do systematic reviews, and more importantly, like where we can actually avoid replicating the existing evidence. 3A has done about 20 evidence gap maps. One of the recent one is on transparency and accountability in the extractives sector. So to begin with, what we do is we kind of like form an advisory group to come up with a framework, key evaluation questions, and also the interventions and outcomes that's to be studied. In the transparency and accountability evidence gap map, we have identified, sorry, it's not probably very clearly visible. Sorry, the other page is not coming up. Okay, here we have the top-down interventions like, say, extractive industry transparency initiative and other global multi-stakeholder initiatives. And then the next set is the citizen engagement that we've been talking about today morning. Many of the interventions that provide information to the public and also provide them a kind of an avenue for feeding back and also participating in programming. And then another set of the last two on environment and financial audit related interventions. On the outcome, we have key outcomes mapped along the theory of change. Some of the immediate outcomes around citizens' awareness and knowledge and trust. And then to the right end, we have more long-term outcomes related to development and key economic outcomes. Thanks. Yeah. So a gap map in our platform looks something like this. So each of the boxes here represent an intersection of studies that look at this particular intervention and the outcome. The bubbles here represent the number of studies. The bigger the bubble, there's more evidence around this particular combination of interventions and outcomes. And the gray ones represent impact evaluations. The red one, systematic reviews. If you could go over the bubbles, you could see the number of impact evaluations. Say, for example, in this case, on the EITI interventions looking at corruption, we have about 8 impact evaluations and a couple of systematic reviews. You could click the link to kind of go into 3IE evidence database that would provide summaries of this interventions. And on the top of the page, we could also kind of filter this gap map to see the evidence in a particular country or a particular region, and also for the type of the design, say only for RCTs or quasi-experimental studies. And also we could filter for the population type, whether it's a rural or indigenous population, and so on. Yeah, like I said, the power of the tool is its simplicity. We could straight away see the gaps here. We have good deal of evidence on EITI related interventions, but there is very little we know about non-EITI multi-stakeholder initiatives at the global level. And also, we have very little evidence around environmental and financial audits in the extractive sector. And on the outcomes, across these interventions, we know very little about the environmental outcomes and the long-term development outcomes. But at the same time, there is also some cluster of evidence around EITI on corruption and the transparency of reporting and so on. And also some bit of evidence around citizen engagement on citizens' knowledge, awareness, and trust on the system in the extractives industry. So just to quickly summarize the implication of this systematic mapping of evidence for future research is there is very little evidence in the extractives because across various interventions and also countries, we have about only 18 impact evaluations and 2 systematic reviews. And looking at the filters, we also see the evidence needs. We need actually a number of a good deal of primary research around number 1 on resource-dependent countries. If we filter for the countries, we would see that the evidence is around like only a few countries, and many of the resource-dependent countries really do not have even 1 entry. And we also saw that the long-term outcomes are not studied. And then we also, when we filter for gender and other equity-sensitive studies, again, there is a huge gap. And also, at the same time, the clusters of evidence also shows that there's a possibility of future like systematic reviews. We did one around, so this theme, all the community engagement on impact on citizens, trust, knowledge, and so on. So that working paper is available here, and we could also visit our website to see that evidence. I'm sure today morning we heard that the evidence in the transparency and accountability is growing, but I'm sure like many of you would have questions around why we have only about 18 impact evaluations and 2 systematic reviews in this map. I'm really happy to take questions offline to explain what was our inclusion criteria and why there is very few evidence in this space. Thanks, Madi.